Hi, and welcome to my additional videos to help you in your calligraphy journey. This video is part of a series called Common Mistakes, and I'm going to be touching upon common mistakes we all do while learning copperplate calligraphy. As always, I'm using a very dark walnut ink, Hand 101, and also I'm using blank guidelines. If you need blank guidelines or additional blank guidelines, this one that I'm using currently is 6 millimeters X height. You can follow the description of this video and it will take you to a link to download for free additional blank guidelines. Okay, so as I normally do, I'm going to be attaching a paper and explain a few things. But before that, I want to talk about why is a common mistake. Do not follow the angle of the writing. So in here, you can see we have, first of all, 5 units, which is the classic ratio for copperplate calligraphy, starting with the X height and short and long ascenders and short and long descenders. Additionally to these 5 units, we have a very strong angle of the writing called the slope or slant. And in this case, in copperplate calligraphy, we are measuring the angle of the writing by the horizontal axis. And I'm going to talk about this right now. So you have in here the details that I just mentioned. So long and short ascenders, X height, short and long descenders. I'm going to be attaching the paper. And if you have your paper and guideline with you, you might want to follow along. All right. So what is the difference between this and other types of writing, other types of calligraphy? So you can see that on all these blank guidelines, we have a very strong angle of the writing, a slope or slant, which is 55 degrees. And it's very important to understand that 55 degrees means measured against the horizontal axis, okay? Because in many other writings, including italic calligraphy, this is the horizontal axis. In italic calligraphy, we might talk about an angle of 5 or 6 or 10, and on the contrary, this angle of the writing is actually measured by the vertical axis. And we will have a slant or slope that looks like that, and we are measuring against the vertical. So first notice is that the angle of the writing that we are measuring, this calligraphy style against it, is against the horizontal axis. So this is not very clear, so I'm going to put it here, vertical axis, okay? So first, number one. Second, this very strong 55 degrees mean that when we have our letters written, there is an optical illusion that there is a lot of rhythm and movement. There is a lot of movement. Why? Well, when we are writing our letters really slow, let me grab another ballpoint pen. When we write our letters very slow, our movements tend to be really slow. And by moving very slow, our letters appear to be upright. If this was measured against the vertical axis, we will call this upright angle 0 degrees. If we are talking about the speed, because a lot of the times when we talk about italics, when we talk about copperplate with these strong angles in the writing, we talk about there is an optical illusion that the letters are moving. So if we were talking about the car speed at driving, this type of letter will be going at 0 kilometers per hour. Okay? In our case, for copperplate calligraphy, if we're going to measure the angle by the vertical axis. Can you see now? It's the same angle. I'm just measuring against the vertical axis instead of the horizontal. This will belong or this will equal 35 degrees. Okay, so it's 35 measured against the vertical or 55 measured against the horizontal axis. Well, if in this case, we are going to measure the angle of the writing now at the angle we normally do. Vertical axis. This is the copperplate axis, but now I'm measuring it against the vertical. So as I mentioned, that will be 35. So now we will get our letters in this angle. If we were talking about a car going at a certain speed, optically, this letter would look like it's going at the speed of 35 kilometers per hour, okay? Because I'm measuring against the vertical axis. As we know, and I always say, we measure copperplate against the horizontal, so that's a 55 degrees, but you understand that I'm measuring both from the same axis. So 0 kilometers per hour once the letter is upright, so there is very small movement or no movement at all, very stable. 35 kilometers per hour when the letters are following the slant of copperplate calligraphy. Now, why is difficult to get the angle properly? Well, it is very difficult because when we do very slow movements, we obtain this, an upright letter. This, I'm always talking coming from my right-hand side practice, because left-hand side practice is different. But coming from my right-hand side practice, moving really slow, I normally obtain an upright movement. Once I move very fast, so if I want to write the word Barcelona really quickly, you notice that naturally there is an angle appearing. Why? Because I have increased the speed of my writing, and by increasing the speed, I increase the angle. Why in copperplate is so tricky to get this angle? The reason is because when we are learning, we are writing really slow. And so a slow movement is the opposite of an slant. So when we write slow, we go back to upright. When we write really fast, the angle of the writing appears. So in here, when we are learning, we are doing an optical trick, which is we are learning to do things under a lot of precision, and our movements are really, really slow. And when our movements are slow, they don't naturally want to get a slant or a slope on the writing. So this angle does not appear naturally, appears by learning it, by studying and forcing the letters to go there, but it doesn't appear naturally because the speed of our writing is very slow. Okay, let's go into another line. I'm gonna mark the guideline, and then we are gonna do a couple of examples. Once you are learning copperplate enough that you understand all the basics, all the foundational knowledge, all the movements you need to do, and you memorize the shapes, then you start increasing speed. But at the moment, it is not possible to increase speed if what we are doing is learning the foundations and learning how to control this very, very tricky tool. Okay, so in here, I'm going to say there is a couple of letters that I personally think they specifically don't want to follow the angle of the writing, even when you have already learned a lot of copperplate and you sort of know what you are doing. So the first example is letter Z. So for some reason, and there is many types of letter Z or Z's, so this is just an example. Letter Z that I'm going to do in here starts from the bottom, has a round shape, a tiny loop, a bigger loop, and an exit. This letter is especially famous for not wanting to follow the angle of the writing. So this is gonna be our exercise number 1. Okay, so I'm gonna go move a little. Okay, let's transform this shape with the thin and thick. So from here, I'm gonna start. Of course, this letter is gonna be different if it's the first letter of a word or if it's within a word, because all will depend on the type of connection I have before my letter Z and after my letter Z. Okay, so let's go a little bit closer. Okay, so at the moment, I'm just going to write the letter without worrying about letter connections just by itself. So from the base of the X height, I'm gonna go up and rounding, push and go back thin, tiny loop, again, loop and exit. And of course, the more you do it, the better it will become. So this is my first approach. I can do it again. And the most important in here is realize that although this letter has a lot of wave and curvy movements, the general slant of the letter form still needs to follow the same angle of the writing, which in here, if we measure against the horizontal, which is what we always do with copperplate, this means 55 degrees. Okay. Now, let's do this again. Starting from the baseline and rounding. And thin on the waist, loop, and exit. Depending on the type of letter you have next to it, so after the Z, you will need to always look at the type of connection we have and the space you created. So in here, I'm gonna say that the space between my Z or Z and the next letter looks good. The space on my second Z or Z looks too small. So I want to increase the space because it's gonna be too tight. So in the example of creating a word like zip, Z or Z-I-P, again, flat top, down, up, flat top, down. And from here, going up, going down, exits. Okay, so if I look at the length of the letters, you can see it's obviously very different. I can fill in with ink the small loop I just created to make it even more fancy. And I have to be very aware of a space inside the letters, a space within the letters. So this is the first example. And this letter, I think, is famously not wanting to follow the angle of the writing, even even after learning very well the angle of the writing and what does it mean. Second letter is letter X. So letter X is the same idea. So I'll do it with the blue pen first. I'll start from the baseline, going up and rounding, closing the first part, second part, kiss, exits. We have to be very aware of the angle of this letter form. And of course, then the spacing that happens before and after this letter form. So see what's going on in here. So to avoid to have too much ink, I'm just going to apply pressure in only one downstroke. So let's go. From the baseline, going up, down, close, 2 o'clock, kiss, exit, and match the weight on both sides. Excellent. Now, let's write something like pixel. So to see how this letter X plays with both sides of the letters connected to other letters. So let's start. You have to be aware of number one, the width of this letter form, number two, the angle of the letter form, because these two letters are examples of letters that specifically want to appear completely upright. Okay, so just special attention on that. For the word pixel, we have letter P, laptop, and the dot of the I, which can be a dot, can be an elongated teardrop shape. And in here is a very clear example of how the angle of the writing is consistent across every letter form. So to the question, why is it so hard to get the angle of the writing to begin with? The answer is because our speed at writing is very slow. So we are forcing the letters to have a type of speed that while we are writing them, we don't obtain yet. So the type of movement is really precise. We want to see what's going on in each pair of letters. We want to make sure the thickness or the downstrokes are the same thickness across every other letter form, and that then the angle of the writing is really pronounced. So optically, this looks like we are actually going much faster optically than the reality. But what we are doing with the hand is a really slow movement. So watch out with the angle of the writing, make your own notes, evaluate your own work, and I'll see you very soon in another video. Thank you very much.